Throughout the history of animation, there have been several instances of content having gone missing as a result of being banned or intentionally pulled from broadcast. This can happen for a variety of different reasons, including language that networks deem too inappropriate or imagery that is considered dated and offensive, leading to that content being taken out of rotation. In 2001, Cartoon Network held their annual Bugs Bunny Marathon with the intention of airing every cartoon the character had ever been in back to back. But an issue arose from several of the cartoons where Bugs appeared, as the content within them contained racial stereotypes and outdated jokes that were no longer acceptable to the modern-day audience. The decision was made to omit these cartoons, known as the 12 Missing Hairs, from the marathon, and instead feature them in a special Toonheads episode that explains why they were banned in the first place. But Turner changed their minds, and even this special went unaired. However, this wouldn't be the first time that content in the Looney Tunes library was taken out of rotation for the use of ethnic stereotypes and outdated content. In fact, there exists another group of cartoons that are considered so offensive they were deemed too inappropriate for broadcast and have been banned since 1968. These are known as the Censored 11 and have a history all their own. If you've ever been on YouTube and come across those ancient uploads called racist cartoons, chances are some of these are from the Censored 11. What's unfortunate about these uploads is they're often posted without context and marked as for kids, so the reasoning for their banning and history about why they were made is completely lost. Let's better understand why these cartoons exist and give some background information about them. The Censored 11 are a group of pre-1948 cartoons that have been withheld from syndication by the United Artists and have not been broadcast on TV since 1968. Produced by Warner Brothers over the span of 13 years, from 1931 to 1944, these cartoons became infamous for their intense ethnic stereotyping. While these are not the only Warner Brothers cartoons that feature this stereotyping, with many common examples being dated to the 40s and 50s, the Censored 11 are considered to be the most overt. All This and Rabbit Stew is a well-known cartoon from the Censored 11, being one of 3 cartoons directed by Tex Avery and prominently featuring Bugs Bunny. The secondary character is an unnamed hunter and predates Elmer Fudd as the antagonist, being depicted with those ethnic stereotypes, including oversized clothing, a shuffle to his movement, and mumbling sentences.
Well, shut my mouth. Where the tracks?
This cartoon is also part of the 12 Missing Hairs group, and as explained in the Toonheads special, at the time, this imagery wasn't seen as offensive to the audience, and the character was simply created to be Bugs' foil in the cartoon. Interestingly, Bob Clampett reused one of the scenes in a later Looney Tunes short from 1946, but an early version of Elmer Fudd can be seen in his own Censored 11 cartoon. The Isle of Pingo Pongo is another cartoon directed by Tex Avery, and follows a cruise ship from New York to a remote island where inhabitants of Pingo Pongo reside. It also features a narrator who interacts with Elmer throughout the cartoon, as the first in a series of travelogues spoofs that are set up in this way. The reason for this cartoon being placed on the Censored 11 is in the depiction of the natives of the island, who are drawn as tall black characters with primitive features and reflect stereotypes of natives that were common during this era. They can also be seen playing the drums, leading to a jazz beat, which is described as a primitive savage rhythm in the cartoon, a connection made in poor taste to the genre. A 1939 article, printed in the Motion Picture Herald, written by an exhibitor, stated in comparison that the Warner Brothers Merry Melodies cartoons are as good as the Walt Disney stuff, another reflection of how common it was to accept this type of humor during the time period. Another character, similar in design to the hunter from All This and Rabbit Stew, makes an appearance in Angel Puss, directed by Chuck Jones, and the only short in the Censored 11 that is actually from Looney Tunes, while all 10 others are classified as merry melodies. In this cartoon, a boy drawn with baggy clothes and a murmuring voice is tasked to drown a cat, which he reluctantly agrees to, after being persuaded by the cat he was supposed to drown. Disguised as a ghost, the cat haunts the boy and further depicts the common stereotypes of unintelligence and fear. In June 1994, Box Office Magazine praised the cartoon and stated in part, "A delectable bit of cartoon animation. There are a lot of hearty chuckles in the reel." Even more controversial than Angel Puss itself was how it aired in Los Angeles theaters, alongside a short from the March of Time series called Americans All, which covered the themes of fighting prejudice and stereotypes. The African American community commented on this in a 1944 editorial written by Herman Hill, who stated in part, "Almost indirect irony was the pictures showing in Los Angeles, in that it was sandwiched between the main feature and March of Time's Americans All, which theme is aimed directly at the lessening of racisms." It has since been learned that the Warner Brothers had ordered the somewhat considered controversial Americans All to be shown in each of their theaters throughout the country as a contributory effort towards breaking down the evils of race prejudice. March of Time's offices were contacted, but stated they had nothing to do with the placement of Angel Puss alongside their Americans All short, but admitted that it was in poor taste. With the controversy that has arisen surrounding these cartoons, you might believe that copies of them would be hard to come across, but that's simply not the case. While the interest in the Censored 11 has been around since the early 2000s, when animation historians became more interested in their infamy, it was the rise of video sharing websites that led to their spread. As previously mentioned, the cartoons found their way onto YouTube as early as 2011, according to a New York Times article, which further popularized their infamy. Low-budget VHS and DVD compilations were a common source of them as well, in addition to some of the banned cartoons from World War II, and can still be bought online to this day. But these unofficial releases weren't the only way they could be viewed, and it was during a special event where their historical context was given for the first time. In April 2010, Warner Brothers and Turner Classic Movies organized a screening of the Censored 11 as part of their first annual Turner Classic Film Festival, held in Hollywood. The cartoons were sourced from restored 35mm prints, and the presentation was hosted by Donald Bogle, film historian and author. Cartoon historian Jerry Beck stated in the original announcement article that his sources claimed all 11 cartoons would be screened. However, it was confirmed that only 8 of them were seen, the only time Warner Brothers has ever exhibited them. Angel Puss, All This and Rabbit Stew, and Jungle Jitters were not shown. Speaking of Jungle Jitters, this was the first of 4 Censored 11 cartoons to be directed by Friz Freleng. Jungle Jitters is another short that takes place on a remote island, with native islanders who are depicted as primitive and dark-skinned. A traveling salesman finds himself in a pot of boiling water, forced to choose between being eaten and a marriage to the village queen. He chooses the pot and the short ends. Reviews of the cartoon from the late 1930s praise its humor, with The Film Daily stating, "The characterizations are very amusing." Another example of how these stereotypes were a common part of society back then. Due to this cartoon falling into public domain, Jungle Jitters is one of the most widely available shorts from the Censored 11, having appeared on VHS tapes as early as the mid-1980s. A common rumor also states that the short was broadcast on TV in Costa Rica in the early 1990s, and continues to air in other countries to this day. However, this claim is without source. Another cartoon in the public domain is Hittin' the Trail for Hallelujah Land, the earliest of all the Censored 11, having been made in 1931 under Rudolph Ising as director. It was released in theaters on November 28th, and, like many of the other cartoons from this group, was praised by Motion Picture Herald. A New York Strand audience seemed to enjoy this number of the Merry Melodies series, in which popular song numbers accompany the animated cartoon figures. But its content contains those same ethnic stereotypes that have been present in all of the ones we've covered so far. The reason for its inclusion on the list is the use of a dog-like character resembling the Uncle Tom epithet, and being too integral within the cartoon for simple cuts to make it viewable for modern-day audiences. The only re-release Hallelujah Land ever got was in the unofficial collections, with the exception of its screening at the Turner Classic Movies Film Festival. The Uncle Tom epithet was used more extensively in another cartoon called Uncle Tom's Bungalow from 1937, with Tex Avery as director. It's a parody based on the 1852 novel Uncle Tom's Cabin, and relies heavily on many stereotypical portrayals that would be impossible to edit out for modern-day audiences. Wooden shacks, cotton fields, and Uncle Tom speak for itself as a reason why it was banned. However, unlike the previously banned cartoons that have never had an official re-release by Warner Brothers, segments of Uncle Tom's Bungalow can be seen in the 1989 home video Cartoons for Big Kids by Turner Entertainment. Interestingly, this VHS seems to be lost media, as it cannot currently be viewed online, but copies themselves are not hard to find. Since their banning in 1968 by United Artists, a production company founded on allowing actors to control their own interests rather than commercial studios, the Censored 11 have never officially been re-released to the market in full. This sentiment has largely been held up by Ted Turner since 1986, when he obtained the rights to the pre-1950 Warner Brothers library, but that sentiment was nearly changed. An article from October 2010 from Toon Zone states that Warner Brothers confirmed it would be re-releasing all Censored 11 cartoons, completely uncut on DVD, through the Warner Archives program. While at the New York Comic Con, I paid a visit to the Warner Archive booth and discovered a most pleasant surprise. The man working said they are coming out with the infamous Censored 11, and it will be available through the Warner Archive sometime in 2011. He also mentioned that it is their most requested title. But only a few days later, on October 13th, the original report was updated, with Warner Brothers claiming that no firm decision had been made on whether the release would be through Warner Archive or a commercial release, and furthermore, if they would be re-releasing them at all. It seemed to be very up in the air at the time for Warner Brothers, until 2 months later, Jerry Beck announced on a call-in program that Warner had decided to go through with a general release of the cartoons, but would include other rare cartoons and bonuses on the DVD. Still, this release never came in 2011, and it wouldn't be until 2016 when Jerry updated its status, stating the transfers had been done, but the DVD release was delayed indefinitely. And then in 2018, word got out that the collection had been scrapped. The decision to cancel its release was made due to changing cultural sensitivities. This in itself has led to a debate about whether or not the cartoons should be re-released for historical purposes, with Jerry Beck having claimed the special screening event from 2010 was a way to test the waters for a potential DVD release. It's not known if the reception of this event had any role in the decision Warner Brothers made to not re-release the cartoons. Sunday Go to Meetin' Time is another cartoon that is rooted entirely in stereotypes and outdated portrayals of characters, with everyone having the same over-exaggerated features as seen in other cartoons. Caricatures like Mammy's and Uncle Tom's also make appearances, with the main character being referenced as a gambler and troublemaker.
Come on, Dice. Come to your pappy. There.
You're good for nothing. Get yourself into that church. The devil's going to get you sure as you're born.
I don't want to go to no church.
It goes without saying why this cartoon ended up on the Censored 11, even with praise from critics of the era, failing to recognize the painful imagery. The final of the Friz Freleng cartoons, Clean Pastures is similar to Sunday Go to Meetin' Time, in that it has religious tones, though they're approached in a more fictitious way. After the stock in Parodies drops to an all-time low, an angel is sent to Harlem to recruit new customers. He fails and is instead replaced by a musical group of angels, succeeding so well that even the devil wants to go. Needless to say, this short's plot relies heavily on its musical style, but this was also one of the more heavily criticized points, as it created a negative perception of 1930s jazz music onto white audiences. This is also similar to how the Isle of Pingo Pongo, another Friz Freleng cartoon, gave jazz a negative connotation as it was described as a savage rhythm. Religious scholar Judith Weisenfeld even stated that the cartoon is no better than the rural depictions of this concept, only that it uses Harlem as an urban backdrop instead. Unsurprisingly, Hollywood censors had issues with Clean Pastures, but not for its stereotypes that were common and accepted in the 1930s, but rather that it promoted vices like gambling and drinking. Though this had no reflection on its inclusion to the Censored 11, it was the portrayal of African Americans that put it on the list by Artists United, as the previous ones had been. Goldilocks and the Jivin' Bears is another cartoon that also heavily uses jazz within its plot, as the titular bear characters can be seen playing their instruments when they catch on fire. They have to let them cool down, and in the meantime, Goldilocks finds her way to their house, similar to the actual story. Except this time, the wolf from Little Red Riding Hood is tired of waiting for her and chases Goldilocks instead around the bear's house. When they return and see the chase, they shout "Jitterbug," and everyone breaks out into dance, which happens again when the scene changes back to Little Red Riding Hood.
There's that Jitterbug!
The Jitterbug dance, having connections to African American culture, with the portrayal of the bear characters in stereotype fashion, would make it impossible to censor in order to be viewed in a suitable way for modern-day audiences. In general, Warner Brothers cartoons were routinely censored, as they were passed only when completed, which led producers to be overly cautious about restrictions. This is in contrast to films, which could be censored as early as the scripting phase. Chuck Jones made a statement about the practice of censoring cartoons in a 1983 article by Ben Fanton, where Jones stated, "I don't like to see the films cut at all. They make some cuts that are so arbitrary and stupid you can't believe it." Independent stations that once ran the syndicated Warner Brothers cartoons never had the same type of censorship as first-run networks such as ABC and CBS did for the cartoons. Some stations even owned syndication rights to a few they considered racially stereotypical, but never ran them. The final two Censored 11 spots both go to Bob Clampett, who hasn't been discussed at all in the video up to this point. There's a particularly interesting reason for that, as the cartoons he directed that ended up on the Censored 11 have a deeper backstory than the ones previously discussed, and Coal Black is one of those cartoons. It could be considered one of the most famous Censored 11, and has been discussed decades after its release by historians alike. Coal Black, full title Coal Black and the Seven Dwarfs, is a jazz-based parody on Disney's Snow White, taking place during World War II in America. It follows the Wicked Queen who loses her prince to the titular character, named So White in the cartoon, and the Seven Dwarfs who are army men, constantly referencing World War II slogans and living on a campground. It goes without saying that the cartoon is full of exaggerated features, racist tones, and outdated references that would no longer be acceptable. But the long-standing debate about it comes from its intent rather than its content, and why it was created in the first place. According to Bob Clampett himself, in the late 70s, the foundation of this cartoon came from a place that was not intended to be racist. He states, "In 1942, during the height of anti-Japanese sentiment during World War II, I was approached in Hollywood by the cast of an all-black musical off-Broadway production called Jump for Joy, while they were doing some special performances in Los Angeles. They asked me why there weren't any Warner cartoons with black characters, and I didn't have any good answer to that question. So we sat down together and came up with a parody of Disney's Snow White, and Coal Black was the result. They did all the voices for that cartoon, even though Mel Blanc's contract with Warner's gave him sole voice credit for all Warner's cartoons by then. There was nothing racist or disrespectful towards blacks intended in that film at all, nor in Tin Pan Alley Cats, which is just a parody of jazz piano great Fats Waller, who was always hamming to the camera during his musical films. Everybody, including blacks, had a good time when these cartoons first came out. All the controversy about these two cartoons has developed in later years merely because of changing attitudes towards black civil rights that have happened since then. Clampett even wanted Eddie Beals and his orchestra to score Coal Black, but the studio refused, so they were only able to record the final kiss scene. Unfortunately, this cartoon is ironic in that it was intended to be a tribute to African American culture, but due to how the culture was represented at the time, it still suffers from the same stereotyping problems as all the previous Censored 11 cartoons, which is why it remains on the list. And despite the attention to detail some critics give it, Coal Black has not been re-released in full since its banning, with the exception of clips from the Cartoons for Big Kids VHS, and the screening at the Turner Classic Movies Film Festival in 2010. The last Censored 11 cartoon that Clampett mentioned is Tin Pan Alley Cats, which is his follow-up to Coal Black, and also focuses on African American culture, jazz music, and World War II. Animation buffs have defended Clampett on these points, with Michelle Klein-Haas stating, "Some even look at Clampett's jazz cartoons and cry racism when Clampett was incredibly ahead of his time and was a friend to many of the greats of the LA jazz scene. All the faces you see in Tin Pan Alley Cats and Coal Black are caricatures of real musicians he hung out with at the Central Avenue Jazz and blues clubs of the 40s. He insisted that some of these musicians be in on the recording of the soundtracks for these two cartoons. But no matter how you look at Bob Clampett's work, or even the other 9 Censored 11 cartoons, they stand to show a time of American culture and history that was once accepted and no longer is. However, at the same time, it's important to learn about these cartoons and view them from a historical standpoint, a sentiment that has been previously echoed as well. Whoopi Goldberg made an appearance in the Looney Tunes Gold Collection Volume 3 DVDs, which featured other censored cartoons, and spoke about how these cartoons shouldn't be forgotten despite their offensiveness.
The Looney Tunes and their irreverent brand of humor are products of their time. Unfortunately, at that time, racial and ethnic differences were caricatured in ways that may have embarrassed and even hurt people of color, women, and ethnic groups. Now, nobody intended it, but that's what happened. Now, some of the cartoons here reflect some of the prejudices that were commonplace in American society, especially when it came to the treatment of racial and ethnic minorities. Now, these jokes were wrong then, and they are wrong today. But removing these inexcusable images and jokes from this collection would be the same as saying they never existed. So they are presented here to accurately reflect a part of our history that cannot and should not be ignored.
And now, if you ever see more of those racist cartoon uploads on YouTube marked as for kids, you'll know where they came from and why they exist, as part of American and cartoon history. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. Be sure to check out some of my other Lost Media videos. Thanks for watching, and until next time, Finn.